Welcome to the National College podcast, where we dive into the latest education trends, discuss best practice, and highlight important updates in the education sector. I'm your host, Eleanor Adams, and today we're going to be exploring the topic of supporting neurodivergent pupils in the classroom. With rates of persistent absence from school increasing and dramatically rising numbers of children and young people suffering from mental health conditions, this is a crucial topic for us to be reflecting on. I'm really honoured to be joined by Catrina Lowri, founder of Neuroteachers and former teacher and SENCO, who is passionate about this topic. Catrina, welcome. It's lovely to have you here. Would you like to introduce yourselves to us a little bit more?
Yes, thank you, Eleanor. So my name is Catrina Lowri. I'm the founder of Neuroteachers and I am a neurodivergent teacher. So I have a diagnosis of dyslexia and bipolar condition, and I have recognised traits of ADHD, dyspraxia and auditory processing disorder. So I have been both a neurodivergent teacher and a neurodivergent pupil, which is why I'm so passionate about this subject.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Catrina. I really want to jump into the first question in this topic and get some of your insight and your knowledge. So, in your work with schools, are you seeing some common misconceptions about neurodiversity or neurodivergence that teachers and educators should be aware of?
Well, yeah, firstly, it's just as you said, it's the language around it, insofar as first and foremost, people interchange neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So neurodiversity is everyone. We're all neurodiverse. We have a huge range of different kinds of minds and brains. And then some of us are lucky enough to be neurodivergent, which means we're not neurotypical. So neurotypical are the 80% of people who have typically developing minds and brains. And then those of us who have some kind of variation are neurodivergent.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. I think I've also been guilty of saying neurodiverse when perhaps I'm supposed to be saying neurodivergent. So I think that's really helpful.
It's difficult because it's an umbrella term anyway. And it's relatively new language. It's only been around since the 1990s. So it's completely fine that people interchange the two. But yeah, that's the first misconception. Also, I think that it's really important to understand that there are 4 areas of need that all neurodivergent people would experience. The first being processing, the second being sensory difference, the third being executive function, and the fourth being social communication and interaction. And there are some beliefs that, for example, social interaction is something that only autistic and ADHD people experience, whereas actually, if you have the other 3 needs, then it makes sense that your experience of the social world is going to be quite different. And schools are inherently social environments, so that's why it's important to know that and recognise that. Otherwise, how are we to support the children if we don't understand the basic traits?
So this idea that there are 4 different needs and not every pupil with every diagnosis is going to have the same needs.
No.
That one child with autism may be very different to another autistic child.
Absolutely. We're all unique. We're as unique. Our brains are as unique as our thumbprint, which is why it's my logo. But I had to get a plug in there, didn't I? But it's important to, I mean, you do get people who are very experienced teachers who go, oh, I taught an autistic child in 1998 and I know everything sort of thing. And that's fine, because there may be some techniques that you learnt with that child that will work with another child, but they're not necessarily transferable. But you, as teachers, we can do quite a simple exercise where we work out what the strengths and needs are, and therefore we raise up the strengths and give children more of the opportunity to show those, and then we fill in the gaps, which are the needs, and support those as best we can.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about that activity? That sounds really exciting.
It's really, this is radical now, right? You write a list.
Okay.
You don't actually have to write it. You can use a voice note. I mean, I'm all about accessibility software. So you can use a voice note. You can record something. You can write it by hand. You can put it in a notepad. You can type it. It's entirely up to you. But fundamentally, you write a list of strengths and needs and you look at those 4 areas. So first of all, what are their strengths in terms of processing? What are their needs in terms of processing? Similarly, the same with sensory needs. Are they hypo or hypersensitive? Do they get overstimulated in certain environments, or are they not getting enough stimulation, so they're sensory seeking? And then executive function, which is one of the things that people commonly don't necessarily know what that is. It's bandied about quite a lot in education, but fundamentally it means the skills that you need to do the activities you need to function. And the greatest of these is working memory. So look at working memory, look at other skills like prioritizing and planning, the way in which a child may find it really difficult to initiate a piece of work, for example, write a list about that. And finally, look at social communication. Are they not getting social cues? Are they finding it difficult to understand sarcasm, which teachers do tend to use a little more than maybe we should? But when you're tired, it's very easy to use it. So, yeah, it's very simple. You just write a list of strengths and needs in the 4 areas, and then you address the needs and you help the strengths to rise up and give more support in those areas.
Brilliant. That's absolutely fantastic. So clear and so achievable. Any teacher in any classroom can do that. As we're just talking about language in terms of this first misconception, I just want to come back to a point because it's something that I'm aware that I've just said. I said both an autistic child and a child with autism. Yes. Is there a preference for how we are describing young people with a condition, whether it be autism or something else?
Well, it's as with any protected characteristic, we use the language that we prefer to describe ourselves because this is about an identity as well as a, diagnosis or description of need. So ultimately, if you don't know how somebody would like to be spoken to or about, then ask them. As a general rule, all the research seems to suggest that neurodivergent people prefer identity-first language. So usually we would prefer to say, I am a dyslexic person, rather than I am a person with dyslexia. Okay. But that really does depend on the individual. Largely speaking, if you start with identity-first language and work from there, that's a good place. That's a kind of good average.
That's really useful to know. Thank you, Catrina.
No problem.
Okay, I'd like to move on to a second question then. So you've already touched on this a little bit, but to go further into this, so in your experience, how can teachers create an inclusive classroom environment that supports neurodivergent pupils alongside their neurotypical peers?
Well, look, it is difficult. It's hard, right? It is hard out there. It's the hardest that it's ever been in my 25 years of working in education. And when you've got 30 plus, sometimes 34 children in a class, and you probably got about 6 or 7 with really significant needs, that can be tough. But there are some simple principles. For example, allowing more processing time when you give instructions. Like, it's a little known fact this, but the average neurotypical child takes 6 seconds to process an instruction. If I were to leave 6 seconds on this podcast, you would notice it. It's quite a long time.
Well, let's just do that. Let's actually count to 6 and see how long that is.
Okay, so this is 6 seconds.
Wow.
It seems long, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
And probably people might have switched off thinking that something's gone wrong with the podcast, but that is just 6 seconds.
That is 6 seconds. So if you leave 6 seconds between instructions, you're going to get better results from the neurotypical peers. And then if you have a child who has slower processing than that, such as an autistic or ADHD, well, not so much ADHD, more dyslexic child, then you might need to leave 15 to 30 seconds for them.
Wow.
So in which case you would go to them, give them an instruction, then talk to the whole class, then come back to them, by which time that's 15 seconds.
Okay, I see.
So just giving the instructions is an easy, simple thing to do. And then when it comes to the dreaded D word of differentiation, which makes every teacher draw breath because you think you're going to be there till midnight making individual lessons for each child, and it gets a really bad reputation. We've also been through every single iteration of what it's called. It's been called universal provision and adaptive teaching and quality first teaching, and I don't even know where we're up to with it really at the moment. Fundamentally, it's the same thing. There are only 9 things that as a classroom teacher you can do.
Okay.
Right? So all you need to do is find the 9 things and then do them mindfully for each of the individual. Like I said, simple, not necessarily easy.
Yeah.
But it is achievable because I've done it, and I'm not saying anything to you that I wouldn't be able to do myself or that I haven't seen done regularly in classrooms.
And I've heard, Catrina, that actually teachers can find those 9 things on your website. So if they go to that, you've got a free download of that resource. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a 1-page. It's just a 1-pager, which is much neater than anything else. That you don't need to scribble down what I'm saying. I'll just explain it to you. So first of all is adjusting the volume. So that's the processing that I just talked about. Okay. So that's how you give your instructions in the class. The next would be adjusting the volume of work to be produced. So you might give them one really, really good paragraph where you really want them to concentrate on the similes and metaphors, for example. Rather than everybody else, you're giving them a whole essay, but that particular child, you are just getting them to hone in on a particular skill. Another one would be prioritizing. So say if you've got 10 maths questions to do and you know that Mina just needs to do a little bit more work on negative numbers, then you're just going to give her questions 3, 7 and 9. Okay. Everyone else is going to do all friend, but you really want her to concentrate on those things. So you see how these are really simple tips that you can just do as and when.
Yeah, because I think sometimes that's the fear, is that teachers think, oh my goodness, I'm planning a whole entire different lesson for this pupil and a whole entire different lesson for this pupil. But these, you're talking about very simple tweaks.
It's tweaks. And that's the thing. You see, if you're planning a different lesson, that's an intervention. That's not a lesson.
Oh, that's a really good point. I like that.
See, an intervention is completely different. That would be teaching this child a different subject in a different classroom. That's not a differentiation. Differentiation are the things that you do in the class. So just simple things like changing the format a child can produce information on. So they could make a mind map, they could do a poster, they could produce it as spoken word, for example. They can just do a voice note to get down their ideas. Those are simple things that you can do. So everyone else is writing an essay, or some people are doing bullet points and some people are doing mind maps. And these are natural things that we would just do. You know a child is really creative, so you let them do a poster. Yeah. Right? Then you play into their strengths as well.
Yeah, I really like that idea. Are there any others of those 9 that you want to briefly mention, or should we move on?
Yeah, I think another one is that people get quite hung up on support aids, and things like wobble cushions are really great. Don't get me wrong. You could do sensory ideas, for example. It can be as well. Another thing that you get a lot from teachers and they get quite frustrated with is the SENCO will say, oh, the child needs to sit at the back, or the child needs to sit at the front, or the child has to sit by a wall. And you've only got so many seats in your classroom, especially if you've got 34 of them. But sometimes it can be as simple as Sophie runs a little too hot, so you give her a fan.
Yep.
Or, Mohammed runs a little too cold, so you close the window. It doesn't have to be anything really complicated. You can just use what you've got. Right, and just use it in a creative. So why does Sophie need to sit at the back? Because she turns around. Okay, but if she sits in this corner, I've got a pillar behind her, so that would still work. It doesn't have to be, just use your professional judgment and what you have around you. That's what differentiation is. Differentiation is what you do on a day-to-day basis, and it will help everyone in the class.
I love those ideas, such simple ideas, and like you say, will help everyone. Sometimes these things, it doesn't matter if you're talking about a neurodivergent child or a neurodiverse child, it will help all children. So that's a great thing to know. Let's move on then and talk about another question. So from the work that you've been doing recently with Neuroteachers, what would you say are the most effective ways to identify the strengths of neurodivergent students and tailor lessons to their individual needs? And I feel like we've already covered this.
A little bit. I think strengths are massively underestimated because we still work on a deficit model. Yeah. And I was diagnosed with dyslexia in the 80s when I was shoved in a porta cabin, and I had that view about myself for quite a long time, but I do have strengths. There are things I can do that a neurotypical person can't do. And it is about trying to see those things. And the way you're going to find this out is by your own observations and by knowing your child. So that's that very good relational practice. Like you've got an amazing singer in your class, right? As part of revision, you could get them to make up a song about that. And if they feel ready to, they can perform it for the class, and that helps everybody. Rather than just getting them to write notes on something, let them display it in the way that works for them. If you've got a child who's really active and sporty, for revision purposes, they could listen to a podcast and walk their dog. If it's in the classroom, then there should be more active learning generally, I think, in school. In the classroom, you can get them to walk around the classroom. You can get them to walk around outside. But some people find it easier to kind of put their ideas together if they have some movement involved. And that I know that there's going to be people listening who think, oh my goodness, that's chaos. There are 3,000 children in this school. How on earth could we do that, right? I am empowering you to tell me what works in your setting. And these are just for instances. These are just ideas. What you take from this podcast is your own experience.
But I do really love that idea, Catrina, about giving children that creative freedom and that choice for them to decide how they want to present something or how they want to deliver something, and also to play to their strengths. Because I think you're right, we always tend to focus on what can't this child do, what more does this child need, rather than focusing on what is it that they can actually do right now and how can we celebrate that. And I think actually by doing that, we would be giving children more incentive to work, more connection to the work, and more ownership, which is going to benefit, again, it's going to benefit all children in the classroom, not just the neurodivergent children.
And that's the thing as well. If you've let her sing a song about French verbs, and the next lesson she has to do a quiet piece of concentrated work that isn't of her choice, she's more likely to do it because you've given her the opportunity, and because you've done that relational practice, and because she knows and trusts you now that in the future she might be able to use her talents.
Yes.
So that's it. It's just about trusting people a little bit, because if you give people that sense of belonging and that sense of psychological safety, they will perform so well for you that you will just not believe the transformation.
I love that idea, and I think it's something that we've said in many of the webinars that we have on the National College around behaviour and around building that connection, that it's understanding that individual child, that individual student, and also building that connection with them. And I think you're right, when that trust is there, they're going to feel more safe and they're going to feel more willing and able and ready to learn because of that. Let's move on to another question. We've talked a lot about students. Can we talk a little bit more now about senior leaders? So how do you think schools on the whole, as a kind of a whole school environment, can implement reasonable adjustments and accommodations for neurodivergent students without overwhelming teachers or staff or support staff?
I think that's key, because at the moment, I mean, you've literally got crumbling buildings. Right.
Yeah.
At the moment, it is. I laugh about it, but I shouldn't really. But that's a coping mechanism that I have. It is bad, right? It is really, really difficult. And as senior leaders, we want to empower our staff as much as possible. So there are things that you can do, such as if you're getting chaos in the playground, could you stagger lunchtime so that Key Stage 2 have lunchtime differently to Key Stage 1, or similarly, organise that in secondary school? Are there ways in which you can make the movement around the school quieter because you stagger entry and exit points through it, for example? And I think what's really, really useful for some schools is when you get somebody to do a learning walk that is a neurodivergent adult and tell you about, like, for example, moving points and transition points and what they feel like and sound like, etc. Because then you get that from a different point of view. So if you've got a neurodivergent member of staff, then they could be the person who you go to ask. Or if you have a parent or a visitor who sees it from, like, oh my goodness, it's loud in here. Because you're in an environment all the time, you maybe don't notice it. You can become kind of numb to it because you're used to that environment. But whereas those children are having a new experience every single day, and if you've got sensory dysregulation, then that very much depends on things like how much you've slept a particular day, whether you've got a slight cold, if you had your Weetabix for your breakfast, etc. So there are ways of doing things in a way that is not intrusive, without spending a lot of money, without completely disrupting the normal flow of the school. But it's really, really difficult to be curious if you're stressed. So I think the first thing to do, and this is good leadership, is to just go to your staff and go, look, this is a problem, right? What ideas do we have? And then you're trusting and empowering your staff. And if the ideas come from the staff, they're more likely to happen.
That's a really good point. And again, it's like we've just said with pupils, it works the same way. If you're giving them more ownership, then they are going to be more willing to do something and to complete something. And I love this idea of utilizing the staff members that you have in the school and finding their opinions, especially if they are neurodivergent. And we've actually just finished recording a webinar that's about this very thing. And you were talking about the importance of having those neurodivergent role models for the pupils themselves, and to be able to see and celebrate that within your staff workforce. So I think that's a really important point to draw out as well. We've talked about lots of different useful things, but I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit in more detail about assistive technology.
Oh, yes.
Are there any particular programs that people might not have heard of that you think are really, really useful for a range of different neurodivergencies?
Yes, I get very excited about assistive technology. I am what you call an early adopter with these things, and have been ever since I was a kid, because once I discovered word processing and that a little wiggly line would come up when you had spelling differences, and then you could get the computer to choose that revolutionized my life. So I am big into the use of all these things. I use AI, everything myself. I basically don't write. This is the first thing, right? People get quite hung up on children learning handwriting. And yes, it's important that they learn the fine and gross motor skills to do that, right? I am all for children learning to mark make and, using the triangle grip, etc. That's important. But in real life and in the adult world, you're going to type, or you're going to use assistive technology, or you're going to use voice to text or vice versa, because that's what everyone does in the world of work. And the assistive technology is getting quicker and quicker and better, etc. And these things aren't cheating, they're a tool, right? So for example, if you use AI to plan something, say you've got a child who is really struggling with their executive function and doesn't know where to start. It's not that they don't have ideas, but teaching them how to prompt an AI to put things into bullet points so that they have an idea to hang their work on can be amazing. It can produce amazing results from a child. And I think that this is the thing, right? It can seem to be very expensive, right? And in some cases that can be prohibitive. But particularly if children have got additional funding because they've got EHCPs, or if you're lucky enough to get sponsorship by a local business, there are ways in which you can use quite low cost programs to make quite a big difference. For example, if you use Apple products, they have accessibility tools on them anyway. So if you have an iPad in your school, all you need to do is look at the accessibility tools and switch those on. And then it's going to take a little while for the children to learn how to do them. And it might be a bit messy and loud to start off with. But actually just knowing the fact that you can speak 4 times as quickly as you can type, and think about the progress that the child could make once they understand how to use it.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. And you're right, just using the things that we might already have in school, I think is going to be really helpful. And yeah, you're at that point about in the real world, very few of us are actually using handwriting, and schools should be about preparing children for their futures. And so we should be using these tools in schools where appropriate, so that children and young people are ready to use them in the future.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, this question really connects to that. So looking forwards, are there any particular trends or innovations that you're really excited about that you think are kind of on their way, or they're coming and they're going to make that real difference to young people?
Oh, definitely AI. I think AI is amazing. And again, right, you see, because I'm old, right? I taught in school for 21 years. I have been working in education for 25 years. So I was at the beginning of Google searches, right? And at the time, everyone went, it's going to ruin education. Children won't learn anything. They'll just Google stuff and they'll cut and paste it and da-da-da-da-da. Right. So I've heard this all before, but actually AI learns, and it learns creatively, and it's only as good as the prompt you put in. So teaching the children how to use the prompts and how to then ask it to rewrite it only without so many adverbs in, or ask it to write it with more descriptive writing in. They have to know what adverbs are in order to include more or less of them. they have to know what a good opener is in order to ask the AI to include it. So it is just another educational tool, and I think it's going to radically change the way in which we educate our children. Like, one of the amazing things that I saw in this one school was they asked an AI platform, which is a well-known one, to do a essay on Macbeth, about Lady Macbeth, and they asked the children to write their own version, and they asked the AI to answer, and then they had to compare and contrast the two to see like which one was better and why, and what prompts you'd need to use. It was an amazing lesson. I mean, that is just a phenomenal idea, I think. So I think this could radically change things. And I also think that for teachers, it presents this amazing opportunity, because if you've got a child with a special interest and you need to do parallel lines through the medium of guinea pigs, then all you do is ask the AI for a lesson plan, and it will tell you some good ideas. And yeah, so I think it could radically change the way we do education. I'm very excited about it.
I think you've raised a really good point here, Catrina, because I think some schools are very afraid of AI, and some schools are entering into a battle where they are setting homework and they're finding that half their time now is being spent not giving feedback on that homework, but trying to find out whether or not that piece of work has been generated by AI. And so I absolutely love that idea that you shared there, where actually a school is really embracing that fact and is actually saying, let's compare AI, let's see what it's capable of. And I think you're right. It's that understanding that it's the particular prompts that you're able to put in that really generates high quality content, or knowing it's very good at summarizing things, for example. Or like you said then, if you've got a child with a lower reading ability, you might need to change a particular text or change a text to suit somebody's reading interests. So really harnessing the opportunities of AI rather than being scared of it and just banning it.
Exactly. And it's a similar sort of thing really with any sort of technology. Well, really anything. You can use your powers for good, right? So like, let's use our powers for good on this, because it could be an amazing force for good, right? There's lots of things that it's not and never going to be able to do, and that's the humanity that we have to put in ourselves.
Yes, and hopefully if schools are using AI, it is freeing up time for that humanity. It's freeing up time for building those connections, for spending quality time with pupils and getting to know their individual needs and strengths. And that's what we're really hoping for. And like you say, it's another tool, a tool in our toolbox. So fantastic. Well, I think we're kind of coming towards the end. We've already talked about so many different things. Are there any final comments that you'd like to make?
I just think be curious. And as I said before, it is difficult to be curious when you're stressed. But that's when it's a good idea to go to your colleague and say, look, this kid has just given me head scratches. I've got no idea. I'm doing the things that I usually do with with an autistic or ADHD or dyslexic child, and it's just not working. I don't know what to do. So go to a colleague, try and look back at your list of strengths and needs, look at the 4 areas of strengths and needs. There'll be something that you're missing. But also as well, don't be afraid to speak to the parents about that. And also don't be afraid to speak to the child, because they may have strong opinions and they might come up with something that you've just not tried. And I think fundamentally it's about that, and trusting, you're a professional person. You've trained hard for this job. We work long hours, right? And, sometimes I go to a training and there'll be like decades of experience in a room. And I'm going, well, I don't have all of the answers. You have the answers. What I'm trying to do is empower you to find those through curiosity. And that's kind of my main philosophy, really.
I love that. I love that, Catrina. I think that's a great place to end on. So empowering teachers, empowering students themselves to find the answers, getting to know them. They may have their own answers and their own preferences about how they work, and using the support of our colleagues. I think that's a great place to end. So thank you so much for being here today, Catrina. It's been a real pleasure to talk about this with you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Catrina, for joining us and for sharing your wealth of experience on how schools can really build that inclusive environment for all young people. I really think the message is clear that our students and pupils need their voices heard to to have those needs met, and they need their strengths celebrated and to have that creative choice in the classroom. If you found this podcast useful, be sure to check out the National College platform, where you will find other trending podcasts, blogs, webinars and courses, ensuring that you stay up to date with all developments in the education sector. Thanks again, and thank you, Catrina.
Thank you.